To quote Ron Perlman, war never changes. The setting of the world of Fallout came to be from warring governments who, in their bid to maintain control of resources and their own ideologies, set the world ablaze rather than let the other side win. And one might have thought that once humanity shot itself in the foot and set itself back to the Stone Age, they might have learnt their lesson. But evidently, this was not the case. The war between the New California Republic and Caesar's Legion was one of the greatest conflicts since the Great War nearly 200 years prior. Seen predominantly in Fallout New Vegas, the war between these two groups was comprised mostly of skirmishes, both within the NCR and Legion territory, all the way to full-scale battles that decided the fate of the game itself. So let's take a look at this terrible conflict today. As a prelude, it's important to note that conflict between these two groups was inevitable. The NCR is a democratic republic aiming to restore order and establish a unified government across the waste, reminiscent of the pre-war American government. They also do seek to expand their borders, ostensibly to pacify the wasteland, but also to improve their economy and their might. Naturally, they would have been likely opposed to a brutal, slave-owning society such as the Legion, given that they disagree with its morals on a foundational level. Yet for the Legion, war between it and the NCR was a historical inevitability, rather than being based on ideological differences. Caesar, born Edward Sallow, was originally an NCR citizen, who through a series of brutal and wacky events wound up as the dictator of a Roman-inspired empire. Caesar's long-term goal always has been to conquer the New California Republic and combine the civilian culture and infrastructure with the Legion's military to create a new empire. Explaining his motives and plan for this via Hegelian dialectics, Caesar believes that the conflict of the thesis, his Legion, and the antithesis, the NCR, would create a synthesis between the two, removing the flaws in both and making an entirely new construct. His plan was to overthrow the NCR Council and rule it as its new dictator, while simultaneously transforming the Legion itself to a standing military force that protects its citizens and his own personal power, referring to this as a Pax Romana or Roman peace. Caesar is a man who is consumed by the idea that his victory is preordained, that the NCR Senate mirrors the Roman Senate, and he is the original Caesar reincarnated, and basically, he's a returning hero, since he was born in the NCR, come to set them free in ways they can't even imagine. Regardless, the exact date of the outbreak of war between the two groups is difficult to pin down. However, in 2271, the Desert Rangers of Nevada agreed to be absorbed into the NCR, in exchange for their protection of the Mojave against the forces of Caesar's Legion, indicating that the NCR was at least aware of them at this time. The earliest recorded engagement between NCR forces and the Legion is however stated to have occurred in 2273. Corporal Sterling, then an NCR Ranger, was one of the first units to enter the Mojave, New Vegas, and Hoover Dam. Having continued his reconnaissance mission, Sterling continued scouting within the Legion territory before being captured by Legionaries. Although being tortured, Sterling was able to escape and lived to tell the tale by swimming across to the other side of the Colorado River. The year of 2274, however, had the first pitched battle between the Legion and the NCR, which occurred at the NCR base of Fort Aradesh. Named after their former president, Fort Aradesh was a major fortification on the frontier of NCR territory, located on the far south of the Arizona border. Ulysses remarks that the courier had travelled there prior to the outbreak of war, and before it became known by its new name, Fort Abandon. The Legion surprised the garrison of troopers stationed in the fort and laid siege to it. The NCR troopers, although stocked with supplies and more advanced weaponry, were isolated in terms of manpower. Fort Aradesh was about as far away from the boneyard as one could be. Caesar's troops, not being softened by the trappings of civilization, were undeterred by the remoteness. While troopers ate through their precious reserves of food, legionaries hunted wildlife nearby, and eventually, via a combination of low morale, attrition, and low supplies, the NCR abandoned Fort Aradesh, leading to its new name as Fort Abandon. In the aftermath of their loss of Fort Aradesh, the NCR began to take stock of their new foe on the horizon. Reports from returned troopers alerted them to the threat posed, and with information from the incorporated Desert Rangers, the NCR military began to continue to build up their military presence in the Mojave. One, to keep House and the three families nullified, but secondly, to protect their interests against the possible threat of Caesar's Legion. Between 2275 and 2276, outright war between the two factions was relatively subdued. In-game lore logs do state that Legion forces began to assemble on the eastern side of the Colorado River, while the NCR became more aware of their threat when scouts stopped returning from expeditions on the other side. One such expedition that did return would be that of Ranger Andy, who was crippled while surveying a former Legion slave camp. A child soldier placed a grenade at his feet, which, while fortunately not ending Andy's life, ended his career. Valuable lessons were gained from these small-scale conflicts. For example, Andy states that the Legion would use children, as they knew it made the NCR hesitate. The NCR came to understand that while they had grown powerful because they'd risen above the savagery of the wasteland, the Legion had become powerful by becoming more savage than the wastes. The next engagement between the two occurred in early 2277. In recent years, a new settlement began to emerge in the ruins of Hopeville and Ashton. Known as the Divide, the town was a new player in the wasteland. In the words of Ulysses, it was a nation drawing its first breath. It was theorized that the settlement could grow to be greater than even the NCR or the Legion. However, these two great powers had other plans. The NCR identified that the route via the Divide would be an immense boon to the nation, as it allowed a second road into the Mojave. Formerly, the Long 15 was the only path that connected the NCR to its garrisons in the Mojave wasteland, with military forces needing to travel long and heavily trafficked roads to reach the region. Not only this, but the powerful merchant companies of the NCR were practically salivating with the caps this new community and second road would bring. Although the NCR had not formally annexed the Divide, their track record showed that this was not far off. However, a second road for troop movement and supplies to the Mojave was something that Caesar could not abide. In their bid to make the West bleed, the Legion had butchered caravans, isolated settlements such as New Canaan, and occupied routes to the east. Seeking to eliminate this road for the NCR, Caesar sent elite forces into the Divide to wrest control of it away from them. The exact format of the NCR-Legion conflict at the Divide is not recorded. We do not know which areas the Legion took from the NCR, or how many casualties the NCR inflicted on them. From the surviving soldiers on both sides, however, it was imaginably one of the greater conflicts between the two, barring the first and second battles of Hoover Dam. The NCR troops were supplied with immensely powerful weaponry, and supported by NCR Rangers and Special Force units. Anti-material rifles, shoulder-mounted machine guns, and plasma casters can be seen equipped by the former NCR soldiers, now ghoulified as marked men. The Legion's shock troops included veterans, primes, and regular legionaries, also outfitted with relatively high-tech weapons, while also supplemented by their Frumentarii special forces. Neither group can claim to have won in the conflict, however, as during the outbreak of war in 2277, a mere few months prior to the First Battle of Hoover Dam, the most dangerous force to the Divide entered the region, the Courier. Bearing a package whose purpose was unknown to both the NCR and the Courier, the Divide began to wake up. The package was a detonator that, when in range, linked with the computer systems of Ashton and Hopeville, and sent a launch signal to the formerly dormant missiles lying in silos beneath the ground. The nukes detonated, the ground split in two, and the Divide was swallowed. The Divide residents, NCR forces, and legionaries disappeared into the chasm below, while the unlucky survivors were stripped alive by the artificial storms, but kept living due to the radiation. Although hard to classify it as such, if any party can stand to have gained from the Divide, it was the Legion. Although they lost entire condominiums committed to the campaign, their end goal was technically achieved. The Divide, and the second route into the Mojave, was removed from the NCR's hands. Joshua Graham, the former legatus of the Legion, states that Caesar and he were both lucky that the Divide was torn to shreds. The lack of the secondary supply route into the Mojave meant that the NCR could not capitalize on the end result of the First Battle of Hoover Dam, and sent their troops into the east to stamp out the Legion in their home territory. Since arriving into the region 3 years prior, the NCR had a pretty weak hold on the region. The Brotherhood of Steel had destroyed entire companies, tribal groups such as the Great Khans and Vipers harassed their forces, and the second supply line had been eliminated in the aforementioned Divide. Caesar looked upon New Vegas as a symbol for his legion to conquer, a Rome for his empire. His Frumentarii within New Vegas and the NCR fed intel to him of the NCR supply, moral, and troop deficits. As such, skirmishes erupted along the length of the Colorado as he sought to probe the Bears' weaknesses on the border. Craig Boone even claimed that Camp Gulf, a relatively inland garrison, was considered the front line for a period of time in the fight against the Legion. However, in late 2277, Caesar felt the time was finally right to stake his claim on the Mojave, and on one fateful day, his legate Joshua Graham launched the First Battle of Hoover Dam. Although General Oliver and the NCR High Command had been prepping for a conflict for some time, the shock and scale of the Legion assault took them by surprise. Caesar utilised his standard doctrine of battle, with legionaries sent in waves based on their skill and equipment. His first wave of recruit legionaries desperate to prove themselves charged headfirst into a wave of entrenched troopers who rained fire upon them. Beginning to take casualties, General Oliver ordered his troops to fall back to the middle of the dam, with a sea of legionaries rushing into its narrow passages. However, as the waves moved up, the high-ranking Legion forces such as Decani and Centurions were in the scope of NCR Rangers and 1st Recon, stationed on a ridge overlooking the dam. The sharpshooters began to pick off the Legion officers, causing panic in the low ranks, who were finding themselves directionless and under assault. Joshua Graham ordered the senior Legion troops towards the back of the assault to force their way to the front, seeking to reach the Rangers on the ridge and eliminate them before losing more of his high-ranking soldiers. The NCR troopers fell to the wayside, hunkering in the side bunkers of Hoover Dam, while the core of the Legion forces charged across the dam hunting the sharpshooters. However, by the time they reached the ridge, the Rangers had pulled back already to the nearby settlement of Boulder City. Flushed with battle lust and having taken the majority of the dam, Joshua Graham felt victory was imminent. However, the legate was not a flexible man when it came to tactics. Rather than reforming his lines and replacing the officers and veterans to the back out of harm's way, Graham instead kept them at the front, intending to crush the retreating NCR. His forces entered Boulder City en masse, engaging in firefights with the NCR troopers and Rangers entrenched within the city, but did not smell the trap until it blew up around them. Ranger Chief Hanlon had packed Boulder City to the brim with C4 and dynamite. While a few NCR troops sacrificed them to bait the Legion deeper, Hanlon and the majority of NCR forces were safely stationed outside, and with the flick of a switch, the city erupted. Stone, concrete, and marble exploded, tearing into Legion forces while those closer to the detonation were killed straight away. Hanlon and his forces swept over the day's veterans and officers, killing them where they stood, and returned to the dam. The remaining Legion forces occupying the dam were the recruit class, trained not to think but only to obey. With no superiors around to obey, they fell easily to the NCR's onslaught. Joshua Graham pulled the remaining forces back out of harm's way and retreated to the eastern side of the Colorado River. The NCR had seized the day, with Hanlon venerated as a hero for his ingenuity, something that General Lee Oliver still holds a grudge about until this very day. In the aftermath of the battle, Joshua Graham returned to Caesar in disgrace. In order to show that failure would not be tolerated even at the highest of levels, Caesar ordered Graham to be set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon, declaring his name as an insult to the Legion, punishable by death. As mentioned previously, the NCR were unable to capitalize on their victory at Hoover Dam and annihilate the retreating Legion forces. With the divide cut off, only one road was available in and out of the Mojave, the long stretch of the Long 15. The NCR forces in the region were exhausted, undersupplied, and although celebrating their victory, were morally depleted after losing so many troops. In the aftermath, the war never ended but instead became something of a stalemate. The NCR focused on consolidating control over the region. The year prior, in 2276, they had destroyed a huge portion of the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel, and so a year later focused on another troublemaker, the Great Khans. A story for its own time, but in 2278, a year after Hoover Dam, the NCR massacred a huge portion of the Great Khan tribe, breaking their power. On the other side of the river, Caesar seethed at his loss and immediately began preparing for the next conflict. With the banishment of his former legate, Caesar elevated a man named Linnaeus to the position. The legion then headed further east, leading campaigns of expansion to gain further tribute, territory, and tribal stock to form new troops. The entirety of Colorado was added to Caesar's domains, and further expeditions into Utah, a partially claimed state, were conducted. In total, 15 more tribes were assimilated into the legion, bolstering their diminished forces. The influx of resources, tribute, and troops allowed Caesar to begin properly refocusing his attention to the west, with the goal of claiming all the lands on the other side of the Colorado River. Around 2279, the Legion began to reignite their skirmishes with the NCR. Camp Willow was an NCR forward base of operations set up in the pre-war site of Willow Beach. The NCR sought to expand its foothold on the opposite side of the Colorado River to keep an eye on Legion movements. Unfortunately, the Legion sought to pluck out that eye. Falling on the surprise troopers, the Legion took the camp from the troops. In quick succession, the Legion followed up by assaulting the NCR military camp at Arizona Spillway to deny them any claim on the territory to the east. The camp was destroyed, and the NCR lost its bridgehead across the dam. No further conflicts are stated to have broken out, or at least were reported, between 2279 and 2281. However, Chief Hanlon does state that 1,000 NCR troopers perished in the Mojave for every year that they occupied it. 2281 was the year that kicked the conflict back off in earnest. In the 4 years since the first Battle of Hoover Dam, the NCR's military presence had increased in massive numbers. Caesar wished to push onto the shores of the western side of the Colorado River, but was unable to do so due to the military garrison to the south at Camp Searchlight. Identifying that a direct assault would be a foolish undertaking, Caesar instead sought to use his intelligence corps, the Frumentari. Having scouted the region, Vulpes and Coulter sent 2 Legion agents into the former town's fire station, with instructions to open the radioactive drums located inside. Camp Searchlight was immediately engulfed in radiation, with the NCR forces there succumbing to radiation poisoning or being transformed into feral ghouls. Having this main base of operations knocked out in one blow was devastating for the NCR. Searchlight was a communication and logistics hub, and panic ensued between the other garrisons on the eastern side of the river as they lost contact. Seizing the initiative, Caesar ordered one of his leading centurions, Aurelius of Phoenix, to set up a forward base of operations at Cottonwood Cove. Since then, Cottonwood Cove has become the launch pad for the Legion raiding operations in the Mojave, being a key foothold to transfer troops into the region while also transporting slaves into Legion lands. Caesar finally had a finger of the legions across the Colorado River, but under Aurelius' leadership, it had an iron knuckle. Shortly after, the Legion forces crossed to Cottonwood Cove and headed north to the NCR military base at Nelson. Nelson had been a hastily set up camp, primarily as a plug between the gap of Camp Forlorn Hope and Camp Searchlight. With the loss of the latter, it was easy pickings for the Legion. A Decanus by the name of Dead Sea led 2 Contumaneer into the town, overrunning the defences of the NCR and occupying it for themselves. The loss of Nelson brought another base of operations to the NCR crashing to the ground, but this one now occupied by the enemy. The Legion used Nelson as a campaign of moral damage against the NCR, as captured troopers were tortured to death in full view of the spotters of Camp Forlorn Hope. Troops were carved limb from limb, forced to jump from cliffs, and even crucified in the main square of the camp. Although ordered by Caesar to hold his main force in Nelson, the town was used as a springboard for further Legion incursions, with NCR troops captured in a nearby mine and ambushed near the NCR garrison of Helios 1. 2281 continued to grow worse for the NCR. With the fall of Nelson and establishment of Cottonwood Cove, the Legion had a near undisputed stretch of territory to pillage, raid, and harass. However, the next engagement was less of an outright battle between the two, but instead the ensnarement of a wild beast in the trap of a hunter. Nipton was a town near the Mojave outpost that was run by an immoral mayor. During the day, powder gangers drank and partook in the mayor's finest women, and during the night, NCR troopers had their turn. The mayor was met by a Frumentari of Caesar's Legion, who offered him 8,000 caps to lure both groups into the town at the same time, in order for the Legion to capture them. Instead, the mayor and the town's residents were also ensnared. In a twisted game of lottery, the Legion issued all the captured people tickets that would ultimately determine their fate. Although being outnumbered 3-1, the Legion were armed, and the captured powder gangers, NCR, and Nipton residents cared only for themselves. Each grasped their ticket hoping it would be their salvation, while doing nothing to save others as they were dragged off to their fate. Some were decapitated, the unlucky were crucified. Third place winners were enslaved, second place was allowed to live but as a cripple, and the first place winner was spared. The Nipton Massacre, as it became known, struck fear into the hearts of the NCR troopers, especially those stationed at the nearby Mojave outpost. troops lamented that they were doomed if the Legion was able to raid so many miles across the river. Further Legion raids were also led against NCR garrisons, such as the Ranger Station Charlie or Bitter Springs, to continue to spark panic and fear into the isolated forces of the NCR that were spread too thin across the wasteland. Part of the reason for the Legion's success in their hit-and-run tactics was due to the vast majority of the NCR garrisons across the Mojave being severely understaffed. In a bid to deliver a killing blow to the Legion, General Lee Oliver had ordered the bulk of their forces to remain stationed at the dam to secure it. This aided the Legion in raiding the Mojave, but did cause some consternation for them in their bid to lay claim to the dam, in what became known as the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. And as for the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, well, technically that depends on what we the player choose to do during our playthrough. The factions we side with, the participants who engage in combat, the commanders who lead the battle, are entirely dependent on us. For the sake of the video, the Courier can side with the NCR and lead them to a decisive second victory at Hoover Dam. The NCR able to lay claim to the entirety of the Mojave, annexing the entire wasteland as a new state of the new California Republic. The war between the NCR and the Legion, while not being fully over, enters a new period of dominance for the Republic. Efforts are made on consolidating the region, yet post-game content does state that Colonel Moore sent Rangers to harass the retreating Legion forces on their way back to Arizona. In the event the Courier sides with the Legion, they seize control over the Mojave wasteland. The New Vegas Strip becomes the new capital for the Legion, and they reach an apex of power. The slaves, tribute, and advanced weaponry acquired from the NCR in the Strip enable the Legion to become more powerful than they'd ever been before. The war between the NCR and the Legion evidently will continue to ramp up, as Legate Linnaeus expresses his desire to lay claim to California itself. However, a third party can be backed by the Courier. Mr. House, or the Courier themselves, can force both the NCR and Legion out of the region entirely and claim it for themselves. Although immense losses are inflicted on the Legion, the NCR is not outright attacked, and only in the event General Oliver isn't talked down. The NCR retreat from the region, still having access to the dam's power but now paying exorbitant prices for it. The Legion, on the other hand, is sent reeling back into Arizona, with the door to the Mojave firmly shut to them by Gatling laser-wielding robots. In terms of the war, an independent Vegas is somewhat of a good outcome for both parties. While incursions can be made outside of the Mojave, the main theatre of war had either been located in or focused on the Mojave wasteland. Without it, both parties no longer even had the centre stage to continue their ballet of war and destruction. And past that, we actually have no idea, because the game ends there. We don't know what happens afterwards, or what could happen. But that is every facet of the war between the NCR and Caesar's Legion so far. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, you know what to do.